Last but not least, we have Lucas Perry. Lucas is a junior studying philosophy. He's interested in contemporary issues in areas such as philosophy of the mind, the philosophy of science, and futurism. He plans to begin research on consequentialism and transhumanism this summer. When he is not working on these useless subjects, he enjoys spending his time worrying about how he will ever make a living. Those are his words, not mine, but a few more of his words right now. Lucas Perry, guys.
Thank you. So if anyone can line a job up for me, talk to me after the presentation. Okay, so the self is an illusion. What do I mean by this? Just take a moment and internalize within yourself, what is it that you are referring to when you use the pronoun I? Who is I? What is I? So in order for us to begin to understand why the self is an illusion, then we really need to start looking into what we mean by the self. So the self is the essence of the person. The self is that which is numerically identical over time. It doesn't undergo any qualitative changes. It is what you are right now, and it is what you always have been. It is this agent, this ego, this subject that you think is having an experience, that has been having the experience throughout your entire life, that has been thinking all of your thoughts, and that has been doing all of your actions. And so this self, it really comes in two different ways. First of all, it's a conceptualization, and second of all, it's a way we experience ourselves. So first of all, we conceptualize ourselves by our beliefs, our values, our choices, the aggregate of all of our memories and experiences. This all comes together to forge this identity of self. If someone asks you, who are you? You say, oh, well, I'm Lucas, I'm a philosophy major, I go to Boston College, etc. And not only this, but it's also a way we experience ourselves. Just take a moment and tune into yourself and see how you feel right now. Most people feel that they are somewhere behind their face, like looking out. Most people feel like they have bodies. Not that they are bodies. You feel like you have a body and you're sort of piloting it around like a flesh vehicle. And you feel like you're this subject. You feel like you're something having an experience behind your face, piloting this body around. And you feel like you're thinking all of your thoughts, and you feel like you are you're the one who's moving your arm up and down. So in order to see if there really is a self, we're going to have to look at all the different parts of a person, and we're going to have to see if any of these parts match our definition of a self as being something which is the essence of a person, that is numerically identical over time, and that accounts for what you have been your whole life. Right? So we can begin this by looking at this chariot analogy. So the chariot is not one of its parts, nor is it a part in addition to the other parts, but it is the sum of its parts as an aggregate. So what a chariot really is a chariot is this conceptual fiction, this conceptual notion that we have invented for all of these parts aggregated and put together in a certain way. So when you have wheels and spokes and a chassis and all these things put together in a particular way, we say chariot. Now, we have to see that the chariot doesn't have any ontological existence, any reality, any existence of its own. The chariot is this conventional fiction, this social construction that we have invented in order to refer to irreducible parts put together in this certain way. And this is what the illusion of the self is. We're going to see that the self is an illusion because it's this conventional fiction, this abstraction that the mind is taking and imposing on all of the parts of the human being. We look at all the parts of the person, and then we say, this is a person. And to think that the person, or the self, has an ontological existence or reality of its own, apart from the parts, is completely illusory. The only thing that is really real about this is its most irreducible parts. So let's take a look at the person. The person can really be divided into two different ways. First is the physical, which is going to be the body, okay? And the next four are all going to be mental. So we know that the body cannot fit our definition of self. The body is impermanent. It undergoes radical qualitative changes. The atoms in your body that you have right now are radically different from the ones that you had 7 years ago. And we all feel like we have bodies. We don't feel like we are bodies. So the body is no way that that's self. Now the next four are mental. Feeling. Can feeling be self? Well, feeling isn't self because it's radically impermanent and its qualities are always changing. You're feeling different right now than you were a moment ago. Your perception is also radically impermanent. It's constantly changing. The way that you look at things is always changing. We perhaps see things in a way that is more wise as we get older. And our volition is also changing. We think that our volition is more mature than it was when we were 5. For example, now we are able to stop ourselves from indiscriminately eating cookies, but I don't think we would have been able to do that when we were 5, so that can't be self. Now, some people think that consciousness is where the self could reside. But the consciousness is also radically impermanent, not simply because we are born and die, but also because throughout a single day, there are vastly varying degrees of consciousness. When we go to sleep, we seem to lose consciousness. When we wake, we feel a little bit of consciousness, and throughout the day, we seem to gain more. Depending on how much drugs or alcohol we've taken, we have more or less consciousness. So consciousness is also changing. If this philosophy is getting lost on you, maybe some science will make a little bit more sense. First of all, we understand that the brain is highly specialized in how it processes information. So we know that there's no one particular part in the brain where we could find the self, this sort of headquarters, this locus of ego that is controlling the actions and controlling the thoughts. This is having an experience. We know that you can destroy any one of these parts and lose total motor control, but still be able to remember faces and do abstract math. And for our 4 mental factors that we discussed earlier, all of these mental factors are located somewhere within the architecture of the mind. Some place in your brain, it is processing all of the information that comes up with your feeling, your volition, your perception. Okay, and we know through the brain that the brain is radically plastic. It's constantly changing. Neural connections are constantly dying. They're being reconnected as you grow older. New connections are forming. So if you don't think that my list of mental categories was sufficient, whatever other categories you come up with are going to fall under the physical structure of the brain, and we know that the brain is radically plastic. I mean, even the way that you identify yourself, your conceptualization of yourself, and the way that you experience yourself are also rooted in the architecture of the mind. And we know that it's plastic and that it can be damaged, that you can have head trauma and that you can lose your memories. You can forget who your wife is. Are you then essentially losing a part of yourself? If you forget all of your experiences, who you are, your name, you've essentially lost the self that we think that we have. So we know that none of these things can fit our definition. So let's move on to some thought experiments, because this might clear it up, because you might be thinking that the past few slides just didn't make any sense and this kid's kind of crazy. But so there are people who get hundreds of seizures a day. It's really terrible. And what they do is doctors go in and they cut the corpus callosum. Now the corpus callosum is some nerve fibers that connect the left and right hemispheres of your brain. Now they go in and they cut this corpus callosum so these people stop having seizures. You literally have 2 separate brains when you cut the corpus callosum. Your hemispheres aren't communicating anymore. So the question for you all to think about right now is, as you feel like this unified self, this thing that is having an experience, this thing that can think the thoughts and do the actions, which hemisphere of the brain are you going to land on when you have your corpus callosum cut? We know that the left hemisphere of the brain is in control of your right appendages and your right visual field. And we know that your right hemisphere is in control of your left visual fields and your left appendages. So which side of your body are you going to be in control of when you get your corpus callosum cut? Are you only going to be experiencing half of your body? Are you only going to be in control of half of it? So as you start to think about this, it should really be becoming clear that this idea of self, this thing that you think you are, is absolutely untenable and does not make sense in the context of such thought experiments. And this isn't science fiction. This is happening today. There are literally people walking around with this, and the communication between their two halves of their brain just does not exist. So this might help to drive the point home a little bit more. Imagine that there's a teleportation machine on Earth. And the way that this teleportation machine works is it's going to scan you atom by atom, the architecture of your mind and body perfectly, and then it's going to reconstruct you on Mars, atom by atom, in the exact way. So as this copy of you is being created in the second teleportation machine, you're simply waiting for yourself to be teleported. As soon as this copy of you is created, this version of you on Earth is just going to be annihilated. So now ask yourself, do you think that this copy of you on Mars is going to be you having the experience? Do you think you will be the one having the experience on Mars? If you don't think that you will be the one having the experience on Mars, then that is the illusion of self. You think that there is a subject on Earth who is having this experience here that is not in this other instance of you. You feel like there's a subject here on Earth who did not make it over to this instance of you on Mars. You feel like you are having the experience here on Earth, and that there's just this radically new instance of you, and that this subject that you think you are, this I, this ego, this self, is not going to be in this version on Mars. So, who here sees a triangle? Okay, you're all wrong. There isn't a triangle. There's only 3 semicircles. So, this triangle is this illusory whole that we are abstracting from these 3 parts. To think that this triangle here has an existence of its own, this ontological reality of its own, this being of its own, is completely delusional. I mean, we all see that this triangle is merely an illusion. Okay, in the same exact way, the self is this illusory whole, this conceptual fiction, this illusory abstraction from the parts where we generate this illusory whole. To think that this triangle has reality and existence of its own is just as delusional as thinking that there's a self. Both illusions are very persistent, and the illusion of self is convenient for existing in society and speaking with other people, but they're illusions nonetheless. From the parts, you abstract the whole, and from the parts of the person, both mental and physical, you abstract the self. So some of you might be thinking, I don't really think that your categories for what the person was exhaustive. I think that the soul is something that accounts for the self. I think that the soul is what is the essence of the person, that is numerically identical to what I once was and to what I am now, and that it is what is having the experience, and that it is the author of action and the author of thought. Well, there's something in science called Occam's razor, and in philosophy it's called the principle of lightness. And what it has to say is that in explaining a thing, no more assumptions should be made than are necessary. This means that we are to prefer theories which assume the least amount of unobservable entities, i.e. the soul, and that we are to prefer theories which are the least complex, because these theories are usually true. Now, we know this through the history of science, and these principles are really the pillars of good science and philosophy. So, if the self is an illusion, then what does this mean for us? I mean, this all sounds very abstract and crazy. I don't know what this kid is talking about. It just sounds like a lot of philosophical masturbation, and this doesn't, how is this applicable to me? I don't get it. Well, you see that if there is no self, which I encourage you all to undergo a journey of looking for the self that you think that you have, and just seeing how you feel yourself throughout the day, and revisiting these thought experiments. Then what does that mean for the person? What are people? Well, we see that people are really just these conventional fictions. They are wholes that we are abstracting from the parts, and that they don't have any existence of their own. People are conventional fictions that we use to describe a certain amount of irreducible parts aggregated in a certain way, whether they be mental or physical. So just take a moment right now and ask yourself, where do you end and where does the universe begin? Once you see that this question is a stupid question because it assumes a self, it assumes a person that we know is just as illusory as the triangle is illusory, just as illusory and just as much of a conventional fiction as the chariot. The triangle was abstracted from the parts, and the wagon is just this conventional label we use for parts put together in a certain way. So we know that what is really real is the most irreducible parts of a thing. This means that we've fabricated this game, we've fabricated this way that we perceive the world, where we have fabricated the boundaries between self and other and the universe itself. Okay, our brains are constantly doing this. We're constantly walking around saying chair, table, floor. But these are really just conventional fictions. Where does the table end and where does everything else begin? It's just conventional. The table is just this concept we've invented, and to think that the table is separate from everything else is to buy into this illusion that the table has its own existence and reality of its own. I mean, think about this. We say things like, my heart beats itself, but I think my thoughts. All right, who the hell is thinking the thoughts but not beating the heart? The thing that you think is thinking the thoughts but not beating the heart, that is the illusion of self. Once you see this, you see that which is beating your heart is the same thing as what is thinking your thoughts. Okay? So we can abstract that and see that which is you thinking is the same thing as you beating your heart, which is your cells dividing, which is the same thing as galaxies spinning and stars shining and plants growing. This is all the same fundamental process, okay? And to think of things as self and other is just this illusion that we've done by buying into the reality that things have an inherent existence. I mean, there are no things. Things are conventional ways that we use to speak about aggregates of parts around us. So think about it. If I am my foot, I am the sun. Thank you.